is Freakonomics Radio, the podcast that explores the hidden side of everything, with your host, Stephen Dubner.
Excellent. Thank you. David, where are you?
I'm in Orlando, Florida.
Okay. So David, first of all, thanks, for reaching out. Your email arrived and it was fascinating and it was great timing. So I really appreciate you reaching out to us and doing the work behind it. So thank you.
I'm more than happy to. I mean, this is a topic that's obviously very important to me, and I've really wanted a way to share it with your audience.
So just so we have it, literally say your name and just introduce yourself, say your name and what you do.
Hello, my name is David Riedman. I'm the founder of the K-12 school shooting database, and I'm the only person that records every shooting at a school in the United States.
Okay, that's pretty good and definitive. Now, I did watch one interview with you and a colleague, Desmond, I want to say his name was. I'm probably wrong on that. Yeah.
Yes, near the original kickoff of this when it was still a class project.
I see. How long ago was that video from?
That was in September 2018.
Oh my goodness. Okay. So when you say you're the only guy, this has become your project, correct?
Yes, the class ended, the kind of research portion ended, and I felt that this was a project that was really important to continue. Desmond is a federal agent, and he trains agents all over the country, and he had to return to his normal job, and I decided to continue this.
Yeah. Okay. So let's try to place you in the firmament of scholarship. And so walk me through, this can be brief, but where are you now? What are you studying? But also I want to get back to the class. I want a brief biography. So maybe it's best if we start at the beginning, and as we go, if you could explain these stops along the way that brought you to here. So let's start with, first of all, you went to college. You went to Georgetown, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Where'd you grow up? I'm just curious.
I grew up in Montgomery County, Maryland. And I think that is important context to how personal this gun violence issue is to me, because I was in high school during the serial sniper. And that was 3 weeks where really going to school every day, there was genuine fear that you weren't going to come home. And that really framed, I think, a lot of my future experiences around school shootings and gun violence.
What was that like to be you were in high school then or junior high?
I was in high school then, and we left the school in groups of 5, running in a zigzag pattern, because there was a genuine thought that somebody might be shot coming to or leaving school.
For people who don't remember, you called it the serial sniper. I guess I'm used to hearing it called the Washington sniper or snipers. Can you just give us a brief, description of who they were and what they were doing?
Yeah, I wasn't planning to talk about that today. So in October 2002, there were 17 different random sniper attacks in the Washington, D.C. area. And there was no clue as to why they were happening and where the next one was going to be. And I was attending high school in the midst of that. And one of the shootings, which is actually captured in my database, was a middle school student who was shot while he got out of his mom's car and was about to go into his school.
I see. It was captured in your database because it took place at the school.
It did, yes.
Yeah. Okay. And then tell us who were the perpetrators here and how they were caught.
There were 2 gentlemen. Part of the movement in the gun violence prevention world is not to name perpetrators because it builds notoriety.
Right.
But it was in...
No. Look, I don't want to... If it's a norm that you are in favor of, I don't want to violate it.
Yes, there were 2 gentlemen, one older, one a teenager. And the older man was the car driver. The younger man laid in the back and fired through a hole that they had made in the trunk. And they drove to random locations and shot people. And they were only caught when they started leaving clues, which eventually led to their arrest.
Is there any evidence that this norm to not name shooters has had a positive effect?
I don't believe so. And I think we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get into talking about contagion.
Yeah. Okay. So you graduated high school. You went to college nearby, Georgetown, great school. Take it from there. What happened when you graduated?
Actually, what happened in the middle of college is I had been a volunteer in the fire department since I was 16 years old. And when Hurricane Katrina happened, I felt that I couldn't be sitting in a classroom amid this national disaster. So I took a leave of absence and I began working as a reservist for FEMA. And just a couple days after the storm,
As a 16-year-old.
At that time I was 20. So I took a leave of absence for a year and I worked on disaster recovery and response on New Orleans. And that really started my career in emergency management, which then progressed into Homeland Security and intelligence. And ultimately that led me to the Naval Postgraduate School, where in my second iteration of graduate studies there, this school shooting database project started.
I see. Okay. Was there an actual job or appointment at Homeland Security then, for instance?
I worked in various roles on the contractor side in just about every capacity, from science and technology, through emergency planning, through intelligence analysis, monitoring watch centers. I'm really a Homeland Security generalist.
Gotcha. Okay. So went to graduate school. When you got out of graduate school, wait, you said that was your second stint in graduate school, or that was your first?
My first stint in graduate school is there's a program at the Naval Postgraduate School, which is the graduate branch of the Naval Academy in Annapolis. And there are a small number of civilians who, since 9/11, have gone there to study Homeland Security as an academic discipline. So I was selected for a master's program there, for a degree in Homeland Defense and Security, where I studied and wrote my master's thesis on critical infrastructure protection.
And fill me in between that and now.
So shortly after graduating, the program was nearing its, 15th, 20th year of creating people that were educated in the discipline of Homeland Security. And what they wanted to do is bring back some alums that had made significant contributions to the academic field and have them participate in an 18-month think tank program around emerging Homeland Security issues. And so as I was sitting in the classroom in February 2018, that's when the Parkland shooting occurred. And that struck me as an emerging Homeland Security issue and something that I wanted to make a meaningful contribution to helping address.
I see. And were you in the minority in thinking that that was an emerging Homeland Security issue, or was that a kind of standard thought at the moment?
This was really an unbounded program where we could go wherever our research interests took us. But overall, the Homeland Security enterprise has really not looked at school shootings as a national level issue.
And why do you think that is?
I don't know. And I don't know if this is the appropriate venue to discuss that in depth.
Because that's a political question, you mean?
No, there are certainly parallels between school shootings and terrorism. Columbine is a shooting that was planned as a direct response to the Oklahoma City bombing. It was not even planned to be a shooting at all. It was a bombing of the school. There were more than 100 improvised explosive devices in the school. And when they didn't detonate, that's when the shooting started. So there was a decision that was made in 1999, long before I was involved in any of this, to say we're not going to make a connection in terms of public policy between this chain of domestic terrorism from Ruby Ridge to Waco to Oklahoma City to Columbine. There was the decision made not to label Columbine as that, even though there's a very clear connection between them.
How do you think school shootings would have unfurled in the last couple decades had that distinction not been made?
I think it would be very different. Now, granted, we have to look at the context that it was still before 9/11. But one of the points that I want to get into is that after 9/11, the public was engaged in preventing terrorism. And we created the See Something, Say Something program. And every citizen knew what to look out for and knew what actions to take. And from taking those actions, you would immediately get the attention of federal resources that would make sure there was an investigation. And that's what we've never done in the context of school shootings. We tell people to look for red flags, but we haven't given clear action to take. And even if that action is taken, there's nothing to make sure that that information doesn't fall through the cracks.
David, you sent us an email a while back. It said the causal chain leading up to a school shooting has dozens of events, and every single one of them needs to be a failure for the shooting to occur. Any single success would break the chain and prevent the shooting from happening. That sounds to me like both an empirical argument and almost a philosophical argument. Can you unpack that for me? What do you mean by that?
I think that it's both empirical, based on looking at now thousands of incidents, and philosophical, because, as you said, leading up to that shooting, there's this causal chain of actions. And with each one of those actions, there's either a right or a wrong decision that can be made. And one right decision is going to break that chain. And I think an incident that really highlights this is the Oxford High School shooting in November 2001.
This is in Michigan, Oxford Township, Michigan? Mm-hmm.
In Michigan, yes. There were 4 students killed, 7 wounded. But leading up to this attack, so just 4 days prior, the parents bought the 15-year-old shooter a gun, and he posted pictures with it online. And then the day prior to the attack, he was caught Googling bullets. And his teacher saw this and made a report of it. So everyone should have been on high alert. And students were on high alert because there were rumors circulating of a school shooting, and a lot of students stayed home on the day that the attack occurred. So what you have is these couple events that should have everybody thinking.
Sorry, can I interrupt you?
Yes.
From my prep that Zach put together, which may have come from your work, it sounded though there was one other, overt warning sign, this drawing that a teacher found. Could you just describe that as well?
Absolutely. So you get to the morning of the shooting, and the parents know there's a gun in the house. If the gun was locked in a safe and the right decision was made, he wouldn't be able to access it. Even if it wasn't, if the ammo was locked somewhere separately, that would be a right decision that broke the chain. The parent also could have just checked the gun safe again before he left for school, would have seen it was missing, and then could have even checked his backpack. But none of that happened. So you get to school that morning, he's taking a test, and on the test, he draws a picture of himself committing a school shooting. And the teacher sees this test, is clearly worried, and sends him to the guidance counselor's office. So in the guidance counselor's office, and his parents are called there are another chain of events where just one right decision would have stopped this. The guidance counselor could have called police or asked other staff members to come in and help her. The guidance counselor did a suicide screening, but she didn't interpret the results in a way that would show that he was actively suicidal. The parents could have checked the gun safe before they got to the counselor's office and seen the gun was gone.
At this point, it was still not known that he was in possession of the gun?
Yes, Stephen. He had the gun in his backpack during this meeting with his parents and the guidance counselor. And at any point, one of those adults could have looked in his backpack. His parents also could have said that he has told them that he's actively suicidal. He was telling his parents, he was sending text messages saying that he was having bad thoughts. He wanted to hurt himself. He wanted to hurt others. The guidance counselor then could have said, he probably shouldn't go back to the classroom. Why doesn't he go for a formal mental health evaluation? And lastly, the parents could have thought, there are all of these different things going on here. Why don't we just take him home? But they didn't do that.
They resisted. Did the guidance counselor suggest that they take him home?
They did, and the parents did not want to.
Because why?
That's really not clear, and that's playing out in court as we speak. The parents are still in jail for intentional manslaughter for providing this weapon. But I think essentially the point there is not to be discouraged by all of those wrong decisions that were made. It's about one right decision being made. And I think that school counselor was really somebody that was left on an island. Because if we think about complex systems, where people tend to fail in complex systems is when they encounter novel circumstances that they're not really prepared for. And we have so many ways to prepare people for these circumstances. But that guidance counselor clearly didn't have the right training, didn't have the right resources, like a checklist or a playbook. And the guidance counselor didn't know how to reach out to other people for help because that guidance counselor was not the only mental health provider in that jurisdiction. But she felt in that moment that she was alone to make this decision, and that resulted in failure.
So let me go back to your email from earlier. You said that the causal chain leading up to a school shooting, let's apply this to the shooting we're talking about now in Oxford Township, Michigan, has dozens of events, and every single one of them needs to be a failure for the shooting to happen. Any single success would break the chain and prevent the shooting from happening. I see that that argument has logic and resonance, but when we're discussing this shooting in Oxford Township, Michigan, it's not so easy in the moment, is it? I mean, when I read what you wrote, it almost sounds as though you've got a prescription, like a checklist. Now, is it as easy as that? Had that guidance counselor, had that teacher, had those parents been acquainted with a checklist, with clear signs to notice, with clear channels through which to report, do you think that shooting would have been prevented?
I believe so. And we have no national guidance and no common playbook for how a school official is supposed to react to the threat of a school shooting. It's on people to essentially make it up when they're in these circumstances.
Yeah. We read a lot these days, I'm sure you read even more than I do, about the different efforts that schools are making to prevent school shootings. From what I can tell, most of these measures are kind of hard physical barriers, right? Metal detection, security guards, et cetera, et cetera. What you're talking about may include that, but is also a lot of softer behavioral and cognitive tools to change decision-making and to change reporting. Can you talk about that split? First of all, am I right? Maybe I'm totally wrong, but if I'm at least a little bit right, I'm curious to know why there's such a split. Is it just that it's easier to do things that are concrete and visible and harder to do things that include human decision-making?
Yeah, there's a multi-billion-dollar school security industry, and it's based on people's assertions about what they think might be good ideas for school security. But none of it is based on empirical evidence. In fact, even the procedures of run, hide, fight are not rooted in any empirical study. On the softer side, I think that we have proven strategies and systems that exist already that could really be a model for this. So we have a National Poison Control Center. And with the National Poison Control Center, if you're worried that you or someone you know has ingested a poison, you can call a number from anywhere in the country and get somebody on the phone, and they are going to tell you what happened. They have expert knowledge. They're going to give you immediate actions to take. They're going to connect you to the resources that are around you, and they're going to help you make a plan to get there. We could take that same model and apply it to a national crisis center where we tell people to look for red flags. What we don't have right now is an easy way for them to take action. You set up a national crisis center, you're immediately connected with acute care, somebody that knows all the resources that are available to you. They can start developing a plan of action. And one of the hidden pieces of the Poison Control Center is that it's a massive data collection and public surveillance effort where you are seeing the characteristics of poisonings, why they're happening, where they're happening, and that allows you to provide product information to manufacturers. That allows you to provide public education. And right now, we are missing this opportunity, first to provide a resource, but then to be getting data about all of these crises, the points where they are, and the ways that they can be resolved.
What institution does the Poison Control Center fall under?
That's a great question. I did look up. It has a $25 million per year budget, which is a drop in the bucket compared to the estimated $3 billion that's being spent on physical security at schools.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let me ask a few questions about that. First of all, what you're describing would be, what's your kind of generic or descriptive term for what you are seeking here, what you're advocating? Is it like a red flag system for school shootings? Can you just give me a title for it, just so we can refer to it?
I think the National Crisis Center would be more than school shootings, even more than mass shootings, because what we've seen leading up to a mass shooting or leading up to a school shooting is a person who's in crisis and they're actively suicidal. And within that umbrella of somebody being suicidal and in crisis, you can also have self-harm, you can have physical and psychological abuse, you can have substance abuse. And this would be a resource that would provide services across all of those different major issues.
Yeah. When I Google National Crisis Center, in quotes, I get a hit in Belgium. I get something tied to Sandy Hook Promise, which I'm guessing is an advocacy position that there be a National Crisis Center like you're talking about. Is that right?
This is kind of very similar to Sandy Hook Promise. Sandy Hook Promise is a subscription service that a jurisdiction or a school needs to opt into. I think that this needs to be a blanket national resource. And just because it doesn't exist now doesn't mean that it couldn't. I think to put it in context, we didn't have 911 service until the 1970s. And so we take it for granted now that just about any emergency that you're facing, you call 911 and someone will be there within minutes to help. So we have templates for the way that this would work. And I think we face the reality with every school shooting and every mass shooting that there were these overt warnings before it, but people just didn't know which actions to take. And if we can put a system in place to, even if it prevents some of them, to get a person help and to stop a shooting before that person shows up at a building with a gun, that's a huge success.
Yeah. If I recall correctly, I quite well could be wrong, but the 911 system was developed, and again, I may be wrong on this, in part because of the public response to the Kitty Genovese killing in New York, which became famous for illustrating what people call the bystander effect. A bunch of people in a position to stop a crime and not. It turned out to be more complicated than that, the actual crime. But there was the fact that police had been called or people wanted to call the police and the police didn't get there as quickly as some people would have liked. When you think about what it takes to marshal public will, political will, capital, et cetera, isn't it a little bit shocking that there have been so many school shootings and something like this hasn't happened yet?
It is. And that's why I think I was really inspired by the episode a couple weeks ago about the airline industry and moving to that zero loss is acceptable model. Because commercial airline crashes were fairly frequent, enough so that you were a bit worried if a relative was getting on a plane. And now there's a complete paradigm shift, and it's just normal. You can get on a plane and you don't even think twice about it. And that happened from information sharing, from near-miss reporting, from data analysis, sharing best practices, and federal oversight. None of those 5 things are being applied to school safety, but all 5 of them together could prevent a lot of shootings.
I guess I have a very naive question, David, which is why? Why is this not happening? If there is a viable solution that is known, that is doable, that's been done in other arenas, including terrorism and, as you just brought up, airline safety and other areas, why is it not happening?
Well, Stephen, I think it gets back to where we're starting with a K through 12 school shooting database that is the only resource that records every school shooting in the country. And it's run out of my bedroom. And for the past 3 years, there have been acts brought to Congress that would essentially create a school shooting database in the Department of Education using a very similar definition and require data collection and annual reporting. And it has not made it out of committee. It was just reintroduced last week, and it's essentially the School Shooting Database Act.
And do the people supporting that act know that the database essentially exists in your bedroom?
I believe so, because the way that the definition is constructed and the way that the terminology within the bill is written, it's clearly very similar to the research methodology.
Okay. And so why does this, well, that's not, sorry, let me go back. Let me go back a little bit. It's really interesting to me when you were talking about the parallels after 9/11, where the public was encouraged to essentially join the crew in noticing, reporting, et cetera, creating essentially a red flag system. Talk about that for a moment, since you probably know some details. How successful was that? It's easy to look at it and say, well, it must have been successful because there have been far few terrorist acts on American soil, at least, but that may be a correlation without a cause. So what do you know about the empirical success of that?
I mean, again, it's very difficult to speak to the empirical success because there's not a lot of data that's publicly available. But I
Meaning
think,
when the system works,
yes,
we don't necessarily hear about the prevention of a crime.
Yes. Now, in the context of the way that See Something, Say Something and the way that the public could be mobilized, I think about if the Uvalde shooting occurred in the context of post 9/11 and terrorism. So on video game chats and social media chats, the Uvalde shooter was known as school shooter. And he was talking about school shootings, and he was saying he was going to commit a school shooting. And in other chats and private chats, users were saying, we're worried about this person. Where does he live? How do we get in touch with the school? But they didn't have any resource. These were people all over the country and all over the world. If that was somebody talking about committing a bombing in the aftermath of 9/11, there would have been a simple way to report that. One person on that chat would have known, contact See Something, Say Something, get on this website. And then the FBI would have picked that up immediately. And the most difficult part to grapple with in the aftermath of Uvalde is that the system that he made those threats on, he had a verified account with his driver's license and phone number registered. So if one person had been able to get that information to somebody at the national level in law enforcement, there could have been somebody at his house, and that shooting never needed to happen.
Yep. Okay, so what you're proposing sounds, I'm sure to many people listening to this, I would include myself among them, like a sensible potential solution to curtail, if not stop, school shootings, maybe public shootings of any sort. What are the objections to a system of the sort that you are proposing?
I think, Stephen, really the biggest objection is the thought that if there's a tip line and red flag laws, that will lead to guns being taken away from somebody.
Mm-hmm. What about false positives as well? False positive threats?
I think that's what somebody is concerned about, that if you have a widely available system of reporting, that somebody who is an innocent gun owner will have an anonymous report made against them and then have their guns seized.
And how would you respond to that critique? What would you put in place to prevent that?
I think that that's a very difficult policy question to answer because it comes down to the philosophical point of, do you care about public good or do you care about your individual freedoms? And I try to look at history and look at the context for these events. And following Ruby Ridge and Waco and Oklahoma City, we put very significant restrictions on who is allowed to buy explosives. And if you are allowed to buy explosives, you also allow your home to be searched at any time. And that was the context of, we can't have a federal building and a daycare center blown up. In terms of fun and sport and having a good time on the weekend with your friends, 1,000 pounds of explosives is probably a lot more fun than shooting your AR-15 rifle. But we decided that that fun and that good time was not worth kind of the cost to society. But I fear that this is an issue that's far too polarized. And I get death threats just for reporting school shootings. So it's...
Can you describe one?
Oh, yeah. I get emails that say, we're going to find you and you'll be eviscerated in front of your family. So, it's a very careful path that one has to walk. And I really try to objectively report a problem that is in every community and every part of the country over now a 60-year period of modern history. And I do that in really an objective manner that can be studied for just about any research purposes.